All right. Welcome to Lassoing Leadership. I'm your host, Jason Rogers.
And I'm Garth Nichols.
This is season 2 of the podcast where we dive into individual episodes of the TV series Ted Lasso to learn more about how to lead in a better, kinder, more compelling way. We've created this podcast out of love for learning, leadership, and of course, our buddy Ted Lasso. We're looking forward to season 2, which we're about halfway through, Garth, where the show takes on new challenges of leadership, introduces new characters, and adds depth to existing ones. It's going to be a great season for all of us.
Yeah, and it already is. And this season, we started to branch out and add a few sort of special episodes to broaden our horizons and further consider different perspectives on leadership and on Ted Lasso. And as you might remember, we spoke to the 4 young women at the senior varsity basketball team here.
That was a great show, Garth.
It was super fun. We've had authors on to speak about their own contemplations of Lasso, leadership, the future of education. And in future episodes, we plan to explore the music of Lasso and hear from other Lasso podcasters. It turns out that Lasso and leadership reaches far beyond the 30-minute television episodes. And I don't think we should be surprised with that. So, Jason, we're on to another special episode today. Why don't you frame it up for our listeners?
For sure. So as some of our listeners may know, I have the opportunity to instruct a course called Staff and Faculty Culture for the Case Leadership Institute. And in fact, right now, I'm in the middle of instructing a course and we're recording this podcast live. Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah. So who's not introducing every single person, but like who's coming to your modules here, Jason?
So we've got people from across the country, from Southridge to Halifax Grammar and everywhere in between. Case has about 100 schools in it. And these are the, I may be biased, but I think they're the top independent schools in North America. They go through a rigorous evaluation and they look to train leaders through things like the Case Leadership Institute. So we're excited to have an audience of about 25 people here live. And we're going to do this again at the National Leaders Conference a couple months from now. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, and this is a bit of a full circle moment for me because I took your very course last summer. We were face to face, which was amazing.
You're like a mediocre student, always interrupting.
Thanks. This is where we first thought of this podcast idea. And listeners might be interested to know when I originally pitched you the idea, it was only supposed to be 3 one-hour episodes, 1 per season. And you came back with the brilliant way of 30 some odd episodes, 1 podcast episode per 1 Ted Lasso episode. So I'm super excited to be back in the module, but also super excited to be doing this podcast.
All right. And Garth, if you remember, and I think you will from the course, we used Dan Coyle's book an awful lot, and it's called The Culture Code, The Secret of Highly Successful Groups. And I can't recommend it highly enough. Given the book plays a prominent role in the course, and I think in Lasso's series and Lasso's leadership, at its core, it is truly about culture. Lasso and Coyle's book. I thought it might be fun to do an episode and share it with the world and talk a little bit about the culture code. You ready for that?
Yeah, the concept of culture is all throughout the show. So, speaking of culture and books, can you make a guess of how many unique books show up over the course of 3 seasons of Ted Lasso?
I'll guess 10, maybe 12. I know there's a lot of books and Beard's almost always reading them.
Yeah, and it's interesting to pause and check out the titles and stuff. But on my count, there are about 21. Everything from Coaching Soccer for Dummies, The Wizard of Oz, Fever Pitch, Calvin and Hobbes, to Inverting the Pyramid. So there's lots of material to be covered. And I think it's a really cool reading list for a book club. Oh no, there's another idea. But let's start with the one that's not in the show. Jason, why don't you give our listeners maybe a 2-minute summary of what the culture code is?
All right. So if you're taking notes, get your pencils ready. Here it is. I'm going to hit it in 2 minutes. Coyle explores organizational culture and what makes great organizations great. He opens by saying the root of the word culture is cultus, which actually means to care. Effectively, culture is about caring. It's almost that simple. He also states that a great organization take 2 + 2, and that equals 10. He then asks the question, why do some groups add up to more than the sum of their parts while others are less? In the end, Coyle emphasizes that through leadership, we can support all people in reaching their potential by providing them with strong and positive culture of work to work in. Early in the book, Coyle introduced a conceptual model, which he suggests supports organizations that provide a space where employees feel a sense of safety, vulnerability, and purpose. Again, safety, vulnerability, and purpose is the loop in which he thinks makes cultures safe. We have the best chance of building a strong, positive culture through this model. That's it,
right.
Garth. That's all of it. I still encourage you to read it, but if you don't, I think that's a takeaway.
All right, let's get into it. Let's start with
Okay.
safety.
Okay, so safety is a really important concept in all of our schools, and how we build safety in our environment is truly through care. So, Garth, I'm going to throw it back to you. Talking about Lasso first, are there any direct examples of how TED has built safety in the space?
Yeah, like specifically with Lasso, I've done a lot of reading in this area too. So when we talk about safety, I think we're really getting towards this notion of psychological safety, meeting all of Maslow's low-end hierarchy of needs. Psychological safety is written extensively by, there's a lot of research by Amy Edmondson. So she's doing amazing work in this area, and she highlights 5 key areas for psychological safety. And that's about clear goals, dependable colleagues, personally meaningful work, and a belief that has impact. And in sort of Ted's world, it shows up. It's very clear what his goals are. Think of his interview with Trent Krim. He has dependable colleagues because he himself models being dependable. Think of his speech to Jamie about practice, showing up. And then this idea of personally meaningful work and work that has impact. It is very clear that his goal is aligned with his values, and that is so much bigger than just the immediate short-term goals of the club. So in Ted's world, it shows up how he makes space for his own humility, weakness, and errors. And it's active listening. He's not always good at that, but he has his moments. And so I would highlight, in the world of Ted Lasso, he does an amazing job of creating moments that are cultural. These moments of safety where people can come together and, be vulnerable and really have those connecting moments. And he does that through his candor. So does Keely. I go on and on about Keely and her radical candor. But so it's worth reviewing some rules around candor as they sort of create psychological safety. And candor for all the leaders out there is centered around providing feedback, and it must be constructive and specific. It has to be timely as well, but feedback are suggestions, not prescriptions to do something different. And so being generous in the way that you give feedback, and then it must come from a place of empathy. You think about it this way: when you give feedback, it can't be a gotcha moment, right? And I think back to the way that Ted talks to Nate. Do you mind if people tell you have something in your teeth? He says, no, not at all. Great, your suit is awful. We need to get it changed. That idea of being as empathetic as you can, like leaning into compassion. So there you go. Where do you see this in schools, Jason?
Oh man, well, Garth, I just want to double back to that for those folks who, were listening to you. Like that Amy Edmondson stuff. Edmondson stuff is so good. I mean, clear goals, dependable colleagues, personally meaningful work. A belief that your work has an impact. We have all of those things in our schools, and I believe if we look for them often enough, we're going to find them, and we're going to find the strength to further build our culture. As Coyle tells us, safety is really rooted in the statement, "You belong here."
Yeah,
so
that's awesome.
When we think about this, it's why we work in the schools around pluralism so hard. At the school I'm currently at, when somebody asks how we would define pluralism, and it is kind of a lofty, ambiguous word, we simply sum it up and say, it's a place where everybody belongs. And this means that we recognize and celebrate significant dates in as many cultures as we can. It means that we design our curriculum so that students with neurodiversity can access information. It means that we mindfully design new spaces so that individuals with mobility limitations can access them to their full potential in these redesigned environments. Last year, we did a survey to better understand our community. I encourage everybody to do this and get a sense of who's out there, at least at their comfort level. One question we asked, and I don't know how many of our listeners would have this answer, but we asked, what languages do you speak at your home? Garth, any guess as to how many in our school. We're a day school. We don't draw boarding from around the world, and we're in Alberta, day school, Alberta. How many languages spoken here?
I don't know. I'll hazard a guess of 12.
It's a great guess, and that's probably where I would have landed. But in fact, there are 33 languages that were identified, which absolutely blew us all away and started to have us think differently about how we're meeting those cultures.
When you're asking, because we're at a boarding school, and we also live in Toronto, which is an incredibly global city. So when you're asking about languages and belonging and pluralism, I think it's hugely important as leaders that we take that into account. In fact, just yesterday at the AI conference, Mike Healy from Trinity College School put on a video of him just reading a passage, and through AI, it changed his voice into 7 different languages, and the AI actually changed the way that his mouth moved to make it look like he was speaking. And he brought up a really interesting point. He said, wouldn't it be nice if you didn't speak English as your first language, to have the head of school or to have someone representing the school speak to you in your own language, because it mimics the tone of his voice too. So it's very, 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 very interesting. So I wonder, I'd be surprised if we ask the same question in our schools. So anyway, listen, if memory serves, next up, vulnerability. Why don't you take our listeners through the Lasso example this time?
Sure. So safety, then vulnerability. And I can't help but think of the Diamond Dogs. There's a truly small group of leaders, Lasso, Beard, Higgins, Nate, and Roy in the end, who come together, share their most vulnerable thoughts, feelings, and fears. Over the course of the series, we see this group starting as a light and humorous support group to a deeply connected network of friends who support each other through everything from relationship issues to mental health to personal loss. I think it's important to be realistic when engaging with groups like this. They don't start with wild and deep vulnerability. So in our work, we need to take time to build that trust so that vulnerability can live amongst the partners. So what do you think, Garth? Where do you see vulnerability live in the life of schools?
It's everything from onboarding, starting to build that trust right away, into, as I said earlier, these cultural moments. And one thing which I like to do with new faculty and new staff is just go through the calendar with them, building trust in terms of building them into the culture. So we have a really special day early on in September. We call it Celebration Saturday at Havergal College.
Oh, cool.
And I think it's really important that faculty know what to wear on that day, because it's a Saturday. And so we don't want them to stand out. Just making sure that they feel comfortable. So it's those little moments all the way up into those big moments when you're working through challenging conversations about programmatic pieces, when tragedy strikes your school, when you know that a colleague is hurting. You have to have always in your mind that level of trust. And so what I like to do as a leader to build that trust is to really try to give a little more than I get. So I like to share a little bit about what's happening in my own life, what I'm interested in. So what books I'm reading, what my family's up to. And I always try and make a note. When I ask that question before a break, hey, what are you up to for the holidays? I make a mental note. So I'm not asking, hey, how were your holidays? I'm saying, hey, how was that trip to Argentina, Adam? Did it go well? Did you have a lot of fun? How was the weather? Those little moments help to build trust, so that when the challenging conversations come up, I think you're there and you're prepared to get down to business with it. Yeah. So you must have seen this in your school, right, Jason? So where do you see it?
I see it all the time. And I think this is important for listeners, is that, back in the day of my early leadership, I had somebody say to me, never apologize because it shows weakness. Said, and don't apologize for something you've done. It's risky. And I think, what comes to mind first is I'm sorry is a really powerful statement. And you can say it with honesty, because you are probably sorry that you're sometimes in these situations, or you've made a mistake. And I think owning those mistakes and being vulnerable in those moments is really important. There's lots of others. I think early in my leadership, it was year 2 or 3, went through several inexplicable tragedies, which we see in schools. We are communities that face both celebration and tragedy, the whole spectrum of human life. And this tragedy took place on a Saturday, and we actually brought the whole staff back together on a Sunday to reconnect. And I remember being new to leadership, and I was aware enough to ask for professional support during the time and navigating the situation. And prior to speaking to the entire staff, which I was mortified of, I didn't know how I was going to manage this. I wondered if I should show strength or show vulnerability. And at that time, the person I was working with was a counselor, and she implored me to cry if I needed to cry, even if it was in front of the whole staff. And I'll always remember that. And I do truly live by it. I think it's important to bring your whole self to leadership. And I think, Lasso or school, we see it everywhere. And I think vulnerability really does strike home. And I think Coyle hits it on the head there.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing that, Jason, because that in and of itself, you telling that story is, you showing your vulnerability as well, which I think is really, really important. And I can imagine too, some people get caught in the moment. What am I going to look like? If I am being vulnerable, how's that going to be taken up? So when it comes to vulnerability, there's a bit of strategy to it as well. Play out the long game. What do I stand for? What do I stand up for? Those are two key questions, I think, in really emotional times that'll help you play that long game. So let's take on the last element of Coyle's model, purpose. Jason, where do you see this showing up in Lasso?
Oh, yeah, I'm happy to speak to this one. As you know, Ted Lasso is about sport, and the purpose in sport is almost always about winning championships. Where I think Lasso challenges this notion is the fact that his primary goal is not to win game, it's actually to build better people. To quote Ted directly, he says, success is not about wins and losses, it's about helping these young fellas be the best version of themselves on and off the field. I think in this way, even when you don't win the championship or you're the top ranked school, you're still able to win in life and in your professional world. I think this is so very important, Garth, and I know you've always worked and led with purpose as long as I've known you. And I don't know, is there anything you can share about it showing up in your work? Where's purpose live?
Yeah, well, actually, a couple episodes ago, we had these challenges that you and I laid out. You were vulnerable and taking on karaoke. Don't know if you remember that, Jason, or not, but maybe this group could give you some ideas around what songs you might sing. And for me, I spoke about my experience at Royal Roads University, and I took a course called a certificate course in values-based leadership. It's an incredible program because it really does allow you to focus on what you value and what your values are. I can't recommend it enough. But one of the other assignments that we had was to actually articulate a leadership purpose statement. It could only be one sentence, the fewer words, the better. And each word was sort of value laden within it. And part of my leadership challenge was to take that phrase and then reduce it into a smaller one. So I've been working on it. But my leadership purpose statement is to catalyze a redefinition of education together towards the common good. And those words mean a lot to me. Each of those words mean a lot to me. So I've been working on this idea of catalyzing a redefinition of learning. And all of that is my purpose statement. So whenever I go into meetings, literally when I start the day, I'm thinking about my purpose. It doesn't mean I actually work necessarily towards it, but I'm taking steps every day to live my purpose. So if you're a leader out there, I question, what is your leadership purpose? Can you define it in a pithy statement, pithy sentence, or is it just sort of one word that you hang on to? So
one thing we're going to talk about in this module as we close today, and we always do, is walking our walls in our schools and seeing where our purpose, vision, values live and how it's articulated in words and pictures and actions. And what I'd say to, the challenge out there is, again, to all the participants in this module, but also listeners, is what is your purpose statement? And I absolutely love yours, Garth, and I see it's congruent with who I know you to be as a leader. And secondly is, where does it live? And so often I think we overlook the header and the footer of pages, frankly. And so think of this, if you carry one of those black books and you keep your meeting notes in it, have one printed up with your leadership purpose across the bottom. So every time you're into a meeting, you've got a constant reminder there. Garth, I'm sure you've got a sticky note or something around that reminds you of this even when you're not thinking about it. So I really love it. And it does remind me of Buckingham's book, Love Plus Work. He really hammers home the notion that if you feel purpose at your work, you'll be able to work harder, contribute more, you'll be happier, and you will fend off burnout. Purpose is so important. All right, Garth. I think that was a pretty good summary of Coyle's book. We've actually got 25 module participants with us today and listening. I think it'd be nice to hear from them and bring them into the conversation. Garth, you ready? You ready for a question?
Let's do it.
Okay. I've got Giuseppe here from Hillfield Strathallan in Hamilton. Giuseppe, this is your first podcast. Welcome to the show. We're happy to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Right on. So I know you got a question, so why don't you hit us with it? I'll let Garth answer it first. I think that'd be kind of fun.
Awesome. Hey, Garth. My question's about creating a culture in a larger system where you have a lot of like subcultures within it. So within a larger school system where there's multiple schools that have their own set of norms and cultures and things that make them very unique that they want to preserve. So how do you kind of find the balance between preserving what makes them unique, but also fitting them within that larger, I guess, overarching culture that you're trying to create as a leader?
Yeah, thanks, Giuseppe. I love this question. We have a junior school, a middle school, and senior school at Havergal College, and they all have their own different values, not necessarily value systems, but certainly their own culture. What I think, how you create a positive culture, you're actually speaking to the people more than the roles that the people play. And I think that that's like a key element to it. The one step that I take is I always speak to my values and how they align with the values of the school. And our values are inquiry or curiosity, integrity, compassion, and courage. And so whenever I can, whenever I'm pitching a new program or a new idea, I either directly and intentionally speak to those values or they're implicit. I also really recommend these gratitude notes. And I know Jason does this as well, but I don't know if you can see this, Giuseppe, but I've created just a really simple note card. And for those listening, I call it the Havergal High Five. And it's just a checklist. And I don't check off all of the boxes. And I leave, but it's got things like, you inspired me and others today. You made a great community presentation, showed creative confidence, took one for the team. You're a great collaborator. You rocked it. You practiced mindfulness. You made someone laugh. Like, it's just a list of things. I can check off as many as I like. And then at the end, there's just a tiny little box there for some pros that I'll write. Oh yeah, and hey, thanks for coming to this conference with me. Like, I can't wait to see what you do with the information. And so I try and fill out 3 to 5 of these per week, just through the week. And it forces you as a leader to look for gratitude. And that's a really great leadership well-being protector, like a habit that you can get into. But it also really shows you what you value and that you're appreciating other people as they work towards those values. Thanks, Giuseppe. Great question.
Hey, Garth, we're going to talk more about gratitude in this module, probably on the podcast moving forward. And I couldn't agree with you more. I really do think it starts with value, congruence, and alignment across organizations. No matter where you are in a large organization, Rundle's got 3 separate schools, the values stay the same. But I also think being explicit with teams when you're thinking about norms, whether this is about standardization, and sometimes it is organizationally when we think about systems, or is this about personalization? And do you have the liberty to construct, whatever the change is or whatever the initiative inside that value set? But it all comes back to values, and also comes back to being purposeful in how you describe whether this is a organizational implementation, which is system-wide, or whether it's doesn't need to be. I think really being true to that is important, Giuseppe.
Yeah.
Okay, let's hit it. I've got one more question here before we wrap up. Garth, I'm gonna spotlight Megan now. Megan, thanks for coming to the show. It's nice to have you. Why don't you hit Garth with your question? I'll let him answer it first here.
Okay, I guess my question has to do with what would you recommend as first steps for somebody coming into a new leadership role, whether it's a new head of school starting somewhere or anyone in a new leadership role? What are the first moves?
For me, the first move is listen more than you speak. And you really want to try and get a sense of the culture. You're listening for cultural words, shared language that keeps coming up. But in terms of what's the move or something you can go on to, I think onboarding for a new leader in a school is about a year long. Like, you have to play the long game. And in all of that, I think just keeping in mind that any successes are we and us, and any mistakes are me and I. Just keeping that in mind. So what I like about that sort of phraseology is that you have this notion that you're doing things together and that you're listening for what the ideas are together. But that any mistakes, that the faculty know that you're not going to cast blame on anyone else but yourself as the leader of the school. So listen more than you speak. Us, we, except when you make a mistake, and then it's me and I.
Man,
Jason, what do you
love
got?
that. I don't have anything, Garth. I think that was pretty on point. My only contention is I think it's not 12 months. I think it's 18 months. I do think
Fair enough.
as a leader, you do nothing for 18 months. And the reason being you run through a full season of the school year, and then you take the next 6 months to recalibrate and check in. Is that what you saw? Is that how you feel? How does it fit with value congruence? All of those things. And then once you're past 18 months, you can start thinking strategically and building coalitions around change and starting to get people's sense as to whether they're with you or they're not. And if they're not, then recalibrating again and figuring out what's the best path for your organization. So I totally agree. I mean, we just had a head of academics come in brand new to the role, old to Rundle, but she actually visited 140 teachers' classrooms in 3 months and did nothing. Just, that's not doing nothing, don't get me wrong, but change nothing, right? And that has been absolutely transformative for our organization. So that's what I would say is just do nothing.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. Not necessarily doing nothing, but listening is actually the most important thing you can do.
Yeah.
And Jason and I've talked about this before. That new person in that role is visible, right? That they're listening and they're making the effort to listen. So I think that's a great point, Jason. But we've talked about a couple of things here. These are great questions. Thanks, Giuseppe. Thanks, Megan. But we always end with a leadership challenge. Jason, can you take us into a leadership challenge?
Thanks, Garth. I'm happy to, and this will be a little bit of homework for the group that's with me today. But what I'm going to offer as a challenge is to write down 2 sentences and leave them in a place where you can see them each and every day. Okay, sentence number 1, answer the question, what is the purpose of your organization? Okay, sentence number 2, I want you to answer the question, what is the why in your job? Okay, and keep them close, just like Garth shared his leadership purpose here. Do the same for yourself, and I guarantee you it is going to allow you to find purpose in your work, just like Dan Coyle recommends in the Culture Code. What do you think, Garth?
Yeah, I really like this as just sort of a mantra to go back to. So sentence 1 again, what is the purpose of your organization? And it's sentence number 2 is what is your why in your job? And as you're writing the answer down, reflect on, is that meaningful for you? Like, is that purpose of your job also your leadership purpose? If not, can you find a way, or Jason, I love that word, recalibrate, to find a way? Yeah, for sure. Challenge accepted. Jason, let's wrap this up. Can I bring us home?
Go for it, Garth. Take us home.
Great. Thank you to Jason. Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Giuseppe. Thanks, everyone in the module as well who's been listening in. Until next time, keep leading the Lasso way. Thanks,
Garth. Thanks, everybody.